All right, I'm going to open up the webinar. You can see people starting to log in down on your participants. You should see those numbers coming up.
Yep.
For those of you already logged into this webinar, welcome. We're just going to wait a few more minutes as people continue to log on, and we'll get started in just a minute. Okay. Want to be sensitive to people's time, so I think we're going to get started. First, let me just say thank you, Kristin, for joining us tonight and talking about native plants. I'm going to do just a quick introduction for those of you not familiar with Brewster Conservation Trust. Take a minute and let you know a little bit more about us. We were established in 1983 as a nonprofit charitable organization supported by membership, donations, and grants. Our mission is to preserve open space, natural resources, and the rural character of Brewster, and to promote a conservation ethic. Since its founding 38 years ago, BCT has helped protect more than 200 parcels of environmentally important land, totaling more than 1,400 acres. We actively manage several of our properties and opened up to the public for hiking, birding, and other passive recreational activities. BCT also hosts several events each year, from our annual Brewster Conservation Day to walks and talks and virtual talks like the one you're about to enjoy this evening. We have 2.5 staff members and a very engaged board of 1,500 trustees, volunteer trustees, and numerous other volunteers helping with land stewardship activities. All of our work is made possible by your support, so thanks for joining us tonight. Before we get started, I'll introduce, I will let you know a little bit about the webinar, and then I will introduce Kristin. Let me just change our slide. You're noticing that your video is off and you're muted. So this is the webinar feature. So we're going to do our Q&A portion at the end of the talk. And I think, Kristin, you said about 30 minutes or so, 30-minute talk, and then we'll do a Q&A. So in order to do the Q&A, if you can just look down on your bottom menu and just click on that Q&A box. It's a little dialog box with Q&A, and you can just type your questions in there anytime you think of them. They'll just sit there until the end of Kristin's talk, and then I will facilitate Q&A at the end. So Kristin is here with us from the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, APCC, and she's the Associate Director of Education and Informational Services. She's responsible for APC's interaction with membership and broader public, as well as educational programming and materials related to APCC's mission. She is primary liaison to the Cape community and interacts and develops relationships with a wide range of organizations, government agencies, schools, and general public in assessing and addressing educational needs related to conserving and preserving the Cape's natural resources. Kristin organizes workshops, addresses civic groups, and seeks educational opportunities through a variety of creative means, such as this one. She's especially involved with Native Plant Initiative and promotes ecological land care and thoughtful stewardship of managed landscapes. And I would just personally encourage everyone, if you're not on APCC's email list, definitely do that as soon as you get off this webinar tonight. Their e-news is wonderful. It's informative. The one that I read today was about native plants and rain gardens and rain barrels and solar energy and really important environmental issues on Cape Cod. So I really thank you for your e-news. I really look forward to it each week. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Dee. I appreciate it. Really enjoy being able to be here tonight and to talk to you about one of my very dear favorite subjects, native plants. The Association to Preserve Cape Cod has been around since 1968. We are an environmental advocacy organization, and one of our many things that we do, we're always looking out for water quality, and we do that in a variety of ways. But one of them is our Native Plant Initiative. And so that's why I'm talking to you about this evening. Native plants, a Cape Cod garden full of native plants and the eco land care practices that go along with a native plant garden have some wonderful side benefits. They help protect water quality. These types of gardens support our local ecology. They're resilient against drought and deluge. They reduce our energy input. Less fertilizers or no fertilizers, less combustible engine equipment, that type of thing, reduces your carbon footprint. And these natural landscapes are very healthy for ourselves and our own well-being. And they're really a sign of stewardship of the land. So why native plants? They have extreme ecological value, which we'll talk about, dig in a little bit deeper. They're perfect for sustainable landscape designs and the land care practices that go along with that. They help create a sense of place. That's a term that gets tossed around a lot with ecological landscape design talks. Sense of place is reminding you where you are. So here on Cape Cod, we have plants that are typical of Cape Cod, such as some of the plants that we'll talk about in a second. But reminding you where you are and that you're not just somewhere, anywhere USA, but a sense of place, a sense of Cape Cod and New England. Our Cape Cod native plants are well adapted to the thin soils, our sandy soils with not very many nutrients. Most of the Cape is like that. We didn't benefit from the glaciers in that way. Our soils are very low in pH and the moisture varies. In the summer, we tend to have dry summers, but we also have heavy fog, and fog drips from the trees. If you've ever noticed along a dirt road in the summer on a heavy fog day, you can see the outline of where the fog drips to the ground. And that little bit of moisture helps sustain some plants. And our Cape Cod native plants are accustomed to the coastal environment. You can see here in this picture, it's a lovely big old beach plum that's growing in a sand dune. And the left picture here is seaside goldenrod. Again, perfectly happy in a dune situation where there aren't many nutrients. For those of you who frequent nurseries, I think I say this at every native plant talk. If you frequent nurseries, you're familiar with the trademark name Proven Winners. Well, I would say that our native species are really the true proven winners. They don't require chemical input or soil amendments. They're happy again with those thin soils that we have. They're low maintenance once established. Many of them are drought and salt spray tolerant. They're hardy and resilient. They're New England plants. They support wildlife. And again, they provide that essence of what Cape Cod is. And this is a lovely stand of beach plum in flower in a dune area with the eastern red cedar behind. So a little bit more about the eco value of natives, which is really what has attracted me to getting so involved with the native plant movement. In this picture, you can see the pink is swamp or rose milkweed, and the purple is Verbena hastata or swamp vervain. So these plants are, and it can grow in an average garden moisture and are happy in a wet meadow situation too. So I'm hoping at some point that all my audiences will know who Doug Tallamy is and that they've all read Bringing Nature Home, because this book for me changed my career path or gave me a real focus. Always have been an environmentalist and conservation minded, but reading this book by Doug Tallamy, who's an entomologist for the University of Delaware, it's just wonderfully written, and he explains why biodiversity and the value of native plants in our landscapes are why they're so important. Doug has come out with 2 more books in the last couple of years. One is Nature's Best Hope, and the other is Nature of Oaks, the most recent one. Both, he's a wonderfully gifted communicator and with a science to back it up. And it had certainly turned the light bulb on in my brain, making that connection between our yards and the support of ecology and conservation that drives many of us. So Doug's the background of his study is his research focused on Lepidoptera, so moths and butterflies. And as an entomologist, he already knew that most insects are specialists. They have specialized relationships with plants. And so in delving into that more, he set out to see just how many moths and butterflies were supported by our native plants compared to non-native plants. Now, this probably isn't surprising because many of the non-native plants that come from another continent, many from Asia, South Africa even, those plants come here and our insects don't recognize them. So they don't have any pests per se, which is not, all insects are not pests. In fact, an entomologist might argue that none of them are. But in any event, as Doug looked at native plants and the Lepidoptera that they supported, he found, these are just some of his findings. The top native plant that supports the most caterpillars of moths and butterflies are oak trees. And the number down here in the bottom, 534. So well over 530 species, different species of moth and butterfly caterpillars are supported by oak trees. You can see, if you just go out and look at your own trees, even in this picture here, you can see the evidence of herbivory from the caterpillars of moths and butterflies supported here. Not only do they support a huge variety of big diverse species of moths and butterflies, but also a tremendous amount of biomass. And we'll talk about that in 1 second about why that's so important. There's a big long list of species and of plant species and the moths and butterflies that they support. I've just picked a few here that I thought were kind of our top plants here on Cape Cod. Certainly oaks are. The next is willow. So this is pussy willow. 456 different species of moths and butterflies. And cherry. You know, many of us may think that cherry are just scrub and wasted messy plants in the landscape, but they support over 456 different species of moths and butterflies. And cranberry. cranberry, over 256 different species of moths and butterflies. So what's so important about caterpillars? Well, one of the things that we've recently learned is that moths are really important pollinators for our native plants. But what's the big deal about caterpillars? Well, this is the big deal about caterpillars. If we want to support our bird populations, they need caterpillars. This is the food that baby birds need. They're soft and squishy. They're certainly more appetizing, you can imagine, than sticking a grasshopper down those little delicate throats. So caterpillars are good, squishy, full of lipids and carotenoids that are important for growing birds. And they are the sustenance of our baby birds. Over 96% of terrestrial birds feed their young caterpillars. One clutch of chickadees requires 5,000 caterpillars. That's just for them to fledge. Both parents take turns feeding the chicks, and this enables them to bring caterpillars to the nest once every 3 minutes. And they do this from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. And for each of the 16 to 18 days it takes for chicks to fledge, it adds up to almost 570 some caterpillars per day. So that's an awful lot of caterpillars to be out searching for. And depending on how many chicks they have, of course. So that's an incredible number of 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars just to raise one nestling or one nest of chickadees. So think about all the other birds that you hear in the morning right now that are raising their young and looking for caterpillars. So, and then also here the point that 90% of the larvae of moths and butterflies require native plants. So if we want to support our birds, we need to make sure that there's plenty of native plants that are supporting the caterpillars that they survive on. There was a recent study by one of Doug Tallamy's students, Desiree Narango, and she looked at suburban area in Maryland and worked with a citizen scientist program where people documented chickadee nests and the fledgling results and whether they were successful in their fledging. And in the neighborhoods where the landscapes were all predominantly non-native species of trees and shrubs, and subsequently not as many caterpillars, the chicks did not survive. They weren't as successful. So the ultimate result was that of the study was that we need at least 70%, more is better, but 70% of native plant species in the suburban landscapes in order to support nesting chickadees. So think about your own yards and your neighbors' yards, and you know, how do you fare in that way? So it was a really important kind of study, just pointing out that it does make a difference what we plant in our yards. So this is just the same idea of host plants. We need to have plants in our gardens, and if we want to have butterflies, we have to have caterpillars, and caterpillars eat plants. And they have these very specialized relationships with them. The spicebush swallowtail, like sassafras and spicebush, is not happy with other plants. Those are its top plants that the caterpillar can eat. Same with the swallowtail, tiger swallowtail. It's looking at tulip poplar, birch, willow, and black cherry. So if you want these caterpillars, you have to have these plants. And of course, this is the classic story with the monarch. The monarch butterfly depends on milkweed. Now, as the adult here, or the part of the butterfly part of the life habit, they can get nectar from any plant. It doesn't have to be milkweed, but the caterpillar of the monarch needs to have milkweed. So this is on a rose milkweed or swamp milkweed getting some nectar, but she's also probably looking to lay eggs. This is a female monarch butterfly. So milkweeds are the only plant that the monarch caterpillar can eat. This has been developed, a relationship developed like all of these plant-insect relationships over thousands and thousands of years. Milkweed is, for the most part, toxic to most animals and insects. It has cardiac glycosides, And the monarch caterpillar has been able to evolve and sort of learn to deal with it, deal with those chemicals, and in fact, turn them into its own benefit. This is common milkweed. I think it's the most beautiful plant. I love the veination. The pink is carried through into the vein of the leaves. The flowers are extremely fragrant. If you know it, you have to love it. It's extremely intense and so wonderful. And I always say, every talk I give, it's so wonderful to smell. I love that it's a natural fragrance and not not my neighbor doing laundry with their dryer sheets in the breeze. It's a terrific plant. So I have a bunch of this at the end of my driveway in kind of the messy area. It's not for a managed, a very highly tended garden because it does have runners. So it's really for kind of a wild area or a messy part of a field or yard that you don't care about because it will spread. So here's this is one of the things that I obsessed with in my gardens and working with native plants is to see what's happening there. Every day is a discovery, looking for insects. I could probably watch videos of this type of action more hours than normal people. But this is a monarch caterpillar eating a swamp or rose milkweed. You can see the systematic way it's chewing the leaf. The butterflies will land on the more tender plants. So if you've got young seedlings of milkweed, that's probably where the butterfly is going to lay her eggs, because like anything, the young would like to have some softer leaves to eat when they're as they're growing. So the most common, or the milkweeds that we have around here on the Cape that are most likely to have in your yard or garden or property is the common milkweed. This is butterfly milkweed. It's Asclepias tuberosa. It can be in this sort of orange color, but more often it's more of a golden yellow. This is a very managed, a very good plant for dry locations. In the wild, you'd find it out in like deserted old fields, roadsides. So it's good in a dry, hot, sandy spot in your yard. It grows low. It's very well behaved. It does have the pods. All of milkweeds have the pods where the seeds blow in the fall and show up somewhere else. But this is not a problem plant whatsoever. It's a good garden plant. And then there's the swamp or rose milkweed. Does well in an average garden setting. A little bit of shade is fine because it does, if it had its druthers, it would like to have sort of moist soils. It's a beautiful garden plant. It grows about 3 to 4 feet tall. So that's a nice one to have. And the world milkweed, this one's hard to find. Once in a while, I've even found it at Agway, but the bunnies love it. They're not supposed to, but they do. But it's a delicate meadow flower that doesn't like to be crowded out. So it's not a long-lived perennial, but it's a pretty milkweed. And just to prove that the monarch caterpillar likes all kinds of those milkweeds, this is the world milkweed that the caterpillar is on. So it's not just all about monarchs that like milkweed. There are other bugs that are have specialized to milkweeds. This is the milkweed tussock moth. And I think it looks like somebody's little crochet project. I was very fond of them when I first saw them in my milkweeds because I thought they were very interesting. This is what the moth looks like. You notice that there's a black and orange, so it's those warning signs, the same as the monarch butterfly, because those same chemicals that are in the milkweed that make it toxic for other insects to eat, these insects have learned to deal with it, and they turn around and make they're kind of distasteful to their predators. And so they use these warning signs to sort of fend off anybody who might want to give them a taste. Milkweed bugs, these guys are always in groups and they show up on all milkweed. These insects are there, they're not destroying the plant, they're just doing their life cycle. They're interesting to watch. They have different stages in their growth, so they're always interesting. And again, they've got that characteristic orange and black coloration. This was a cool little beetle. It's a swamp milkweed leaf beetle. I came across it a few years ago, and when I looked it up and I found out what it was, I said, well, that's good because that's where I found it, on the swamp milkweed. Just a good little leaf beetle, interesting. And the other thing that shows up are these Oleander Aphids. They are not native insects, but they don't do any harm. They're there sucking the sap out of the plant. And if you know anything about the aphid and ant connection, there are ants that take advantage of the Oleander Aphids or any aphid and will harvest the dew, which is really the excrement of the aphids. So they're really pretty, brilliant gold color. We just leave them. They're not doing any harm. So our native plants also support pollinators. There's those specialized relationships, not just with eating the plants, but other insects. There are many bees that are specialized pollinators. There are long-tongued bees and short-tongued bees, and some bees are very specific to the plant whose pollen they collect. An example, which is not anything to do with a native plant, but we have squash bees. Squash bees you'll find in the blossom of your zucchini blossoms. When the blossoms are open first thing in the morning, you'll see that there might be some bees sleeping inside the blossom. They only feed the pollen from squash blossoms to their babies. So there are lots of other insects and bees that have those very specialized relationships as well. But the long-tongued bees are adapted to certain plants, and the short-tongued bees are adapted to other plants. And there's very complex relationships that I don't think we've even scratched the surface of understanding. And of course, there's a lot of pollinators. It's not just the bumblebees, but there are little tiny ground bees and mason bees, the carpenter bees that might be going in and out of your shed, out of where they lay their larvae, those big bomber bees, big gentle giants. Wasps will pollinate, butterflies, moths. Again, they just found out that moths are just an incredible pollinators, doing most of the pollination at night. Flies are also really big pollinators, as well are beetles. Hummingbirds a little bit, and bats, we're in the Southwest. Here they're pretty much just insect eaters. And of course, honeybees, which honeybees are not native, and I might make a mention about that later. So in pollinator, this is my backyard, and I put a sign out telling everybody it's pollinator habitat. What makes it a good pollinator habitat? It's having a variety of plants, particularly the native plants. It's also the way you manage the yard, not being too fussy and having everything absolutely perfect, because bumblebees need some leaves to hide under over the winter, as well as lots of other beneficial insects. You need a little bit of water, maybe. Obviously, pesticide free. You have to be pesticide free. So this is a good reason to leave a little wild areas somewhere. These are little ground nesting bees, and most of our native pollinators are ground nesting bees. They're solitary bees. They don't have hives. They dig a little tunnel down into the ground, and you may find these, and just take a look. If you see like a hole in the ground like this, just stop and take a look at it a little while, and you might find that it's one of these guys that comes out of the hole. It might not be an ant hole. It might be one of our native bees. So this is a female. She's dug a tunnel down into the ground, and off of the tunnel are little chambers where she'll lay an egg and then provision it with some pollen and nectar, a little pollen ball, and then create another chamber and another larvae. This is all they do. These guys don't sting. They're not interested in anything except creating the next generation. And they come in all different colors, and they're pretty interesting little bees. So just a few photos. Bumblebee, this is wild bergamot. Bernardo Fistulosa. It's a really lovely garden plant. The pollinators love it. Just to make sure that you believe me that flies pollinate. Flies are there to get some nectar, but their hairy little bodies will carry pollen, and I thought that illustrates that quite well. These are some of my, this is a favorite insect of mine. This is the great golden digger wasp. These guys show up for nectar in the garden all the time. They have no interest in stinging, although they are quite impressive when you first see them. They too ground nest and do the same thing that I just explained about that tiny bee. They just create an area where they will lay their brood, where she will lay her brood. But it's just all about the next generation, creating the next generation. They feed their babies, as most wasps do, feed them paralyzed insects. So she will go and capture something, but she's getting some nectar for herself here. And the honeybee. So we're all about protecting the bees. And I guess we have to thank the honeybee, because that was what brought it all to our attention, that our pesticides and our land use is causing problems for our pollinators. But the honeybee, we don't have to worry about protecting the honeybee so much. It's kind of, they're really like chickens. They're a domesticated animal that's not native. It's a great hobby, but our real interest is protecting our native pollinators, and a lot of that has to do with how we're managing our landscapes, and of course the trying to get rid of the pesticide use to the greatest extent we can. A cute little bee that really gets themselves covered with pollen. This is a clearwing moth, getting some nectar from Liatris. And it's great to have wasps in the garden. Nobody wants to have a nest where you're going to be, where you spend your time, but you need to have wasps in the garden to help control other insects. And just like that golden digger wasp, this yellow jacket is getting a sweet little lunch, but will be taking other insects to feed its babies. This is just a bumblebee inside a penstemon flower, but it's a great little picture of the basket, the pollen basket on the leg of the bee. And this is where it's packing the pollen to take back to the nest. So our natural landscapes are so important for a lot of reasons. Again, they're going to support the ecology and our biodiversity. We have a real great opportunity to do that as land stewards and as people, as conservationists, and those who want to take enjoyment in the natural world. We can do that in our own yard in many different ways. We can help protect water quality. We can conserve water. A lot of our non-native plants are real water hogs. Our native plants, again, once they're established, are very accustomed, if they're in the right place, and don't need to be irrigated. We can reduce our carbon footprint by kind of changing our methodology and our design so that don't have extensive lawns and we're not spending a lot of time mowing. And of course, we can retain that sense of place. This is what we did at APCC's office. We are trying to practice what we preach. And this was our first little meadow that we put in when we moved into the place in 2016. Meadows morph, they change. This was a seeded area. This was the second year. The first year we had lots of partridge pea that immediately flowered. That's a great little annual plant. The second year was black-eyed Susans. In the third year, it turned more into some goldenrod. This is the front of the office. We've been actively getting rid of lawn and putting in a variety of native plants. This is that little meadow after the third year when it became mostly goldenrod. And this is the Bernardo Fistulosa. Little stem bluegrass is our native, one of our wonderful native grasses. This is what it looks like in the winter. We leave everything standing. It's very important to leave the leaves and leave the dead standing. There's some wonderful seed heads from evening primrose and from the oxeye sunflowers that the goldfinches just loved. So we would sit here at our staff meeting pre-COVID when we were all together and get to gaze out on our little tiny meadow here and just see all the activity. Of course, in a landscape, not everybody's, I understand not everybody's interest is having a wild and crazy meadow. Some of the design interests to have are having just sort of some clean lines, some readable lines in the landscape. So this is, we try to keep our meadow with an edging. This is barren strawberry. This is tiarella or foam flower. And just sort of creating an edge there that kind of a legible design. So in the end, I think the big, my personal interest and what I think is so valuable to all of us is to understand that we can have really living landscapes. Landscapes of just lawn and non-native shrubs don't provide any wildlife value and often are just the opposite. They can be toxic areas for all of us when turf lawn needs to be treated and fertilized. And we all know that we've got a nitrogen problem on Cape Cod. So we're trying to really show that there is another way to have landscapes without fertilizers and without pesticides, and also embracing our nature. I think that every day can be discovery in the garden. It's certainly what drives me. Every day I love to see what's new out there, and I think it's really good for one's psyche. And so to that end, we've just launched this website. It's a plant finder website where folks can go to it and plug in. Okay, gonna let me go to the website. Here we go. You can put in your plant type that you're looking for. You can choose what the site is, whether you've got full sun, what your moisture, if it's just average soil or if it's dry or moist. You can choose the bloom month, size, and nature benefits. And then it will search out and give you some ideas of what native plants might work. So these are not, everything on this website are not all indigenous plants to Cape Cod, but they're all appropriate for landscapes. They're native to the Northeast region. So we hope that this will help people kind of, wade through. I know that a lot of people have called me over the years and have said, we really want to, I don't know where to start. So we're hoping that we've got over 60 plants in this website. So we're hoping that this will help people kind of filter through and find the perfect plant that they want for their yard. I'll also give a plug the fact that we are going to be having a plant sale. Check around. There's a lot of people who are promoting native plants, and probably some of the garden clubs are going to have native plant sales. APCC is going to have their first one this year. It'll be sometime in June, and we'll be putting more information out about that. So that will be in our, we'll be advertising that in our e-newsletter and on Facebook and on our website. And we also have a Facebook page associated with this CapeCodNativePlants.org. So there are plants being featured there. Try to post something almost every day or every other day. So it's another good way to just kind of see what's out there. And this is a picture of our rain garden behind here. I hope it looks like it this year. So thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kristin. That was wonderful. You can stop your screen sharing and then everybody can see you. Great, fantastic. Just letting everybody know that someone typed in the chat box. Thank you for typing that Doug Tallamy is going to be at HCT May 17th at 7 p.m. I think that's a virtual talk. So you can go on Howard Conservation Trust website and sign up for that talk, I believe. Everyone that is registered for this, for Kristin's talk here, will be getting an email, and in that email will be a link to the video that we're recording today. And also I'll put some other links in it for you as well. The link that Kristin just mentioned to the Cape Cod Native Plants website and to the Doug Tallamy talk, etc. Let's get to some questions. First questions, where are some good local resources for native plants? And you just mentioned the plant sales.
Right, there might be some specialty sales. Capabilities Farm right next to us on 6A in Dennis carries a good number. When we first moved in there, we collaborated with them, and so they've grown out a lot of, they carry some native plants. Most of the nurseries are going to carry some. It just depends on what you're looking for. You know, like Crocker Nursery carries them. There's some places down Falmouth Way and up towards Truro Way. It's really a matter of what you're looking for, and it's always good to know what it is you want and what the scientific name is of the plant, and then go looking for it. There are also some really wonderful online sources. Your plants online and they come mailed to you. So, but it is a matter of asking in supply and demand. So the more people ask for native plants, the more nurseries and growers will start carrying them.
Okay. Next question. I think you may have answered this, but does butterfly weed support the monarch?
Butterfly milkweed does, not butterfly bush. That's a common, I don't know if that was the question, but I know that that can be confusing. The nurseries, retail nurseries will promote butterfly bush because it's a pollinator magnet because of its nectar, but it doesn't provide any food source for any native insects, never mind the monarch. So in fact, some butterfly bush is invasive. So butterfly milkweed, yes.
Okay. Rabbit and deer resistant plants. Is there such a thing?
There is, you know, it all depends on how desperate and what the pressure is for deer to find food or rabbits to find food. And certainly we've had a huge rabbit population 2 and 3 seasons now. There are lots of shrubs and perennials that are listed as deer resistant or distasteful. That is, a lot of those notes are on our plant finder. We try to, there are fact sheets on each of those plants, and we try to make mention of that. So.
Let's see. Oh, someone wants to know where you got your pollinator habitat sign because they love it.
No, that's from the Xerces Society. He's reading Doug Tallamy's book. If you haven't, everybody needs to know about the Xerces Society, xerces.org. They are the leading scientific advocacy group for invertebrates. So they're interested in insects, fireflies, pollinators. It's a wonderful organization. They're out on the West Coast, but they're really all over. They have representatives here in New England that do talks, and go to their website.
Okay, great. And those of you that were answering these questions, if you have a follow-up question, just type it in again on the Q&A. Someone's asking about Robosa roses on Cape Cod, and if are they invasive? Question mark.
That's a debatable question. Personally, I would say yes, from what I've seen over the last few decades. Robosa rose is not native. I know it's everybody says, oh, it's the beach rose, but it's not native. It's originally from China. It's been planted because it is beautiful, and it is a good erosion control. But once you have it, you can't get rid of it. And one of the characteristics of invasive species is that they're able to seed and propagate themselves beyond where they're planted. And I would argue that Robosa rose, the fruit, the rose hips do find their way elsewhere, which is why it's all around our dunes. Those were not hand planted. It's been spreading for the last many decades. So I recommend if somebody wants to have a good native rose, there's Virginia rose or pasture rose.
What about, someone just recommended Carolina rose to us?
Yep, Carolina or pasture rose. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, good option.
Okay, let's see. Can you talk a little bit more about when and when not to remove dead plants?
The advice for many years was, you know, wait until you see the bumblebees out, and then it's safe to rake your leaves. If you listen to Doug Tallamy, he would say, you know, there are all sorts of insects. It's not just about bumblebees. And it's really good to just have some natural areas and some places where you're not raking and being fastidious about things. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I leave leaves everywhere, and it is nature's mulch, and plants come up through them. It doesn't hinder the perennials from growing. In fact, it benefits them for moisture content and for nutrient recycling. So best not to do much cleanup at all, frankly. Any of the dead standing stems can harbor beneficial insects, overwintering insects, and then and they all emerge at different times. So you make your choices what you want to do, but you know, when you want to do it. We cleaned up our garden over at the office a little bit earlier this year, as far as cutting down the dead standing stems, but we've cut them back. We've cut them into pieces and used them as mulch and put them back on the beds. But so it's just best to hold off as much as you can. Benefits the insects.
Okay. How do you turn a small hill of something like lily of the valley, a myrtle, or a violets into native plants? Do you have to dig up the entire area?
I don't have any personal experience dealing with lily of the valley. There are, you know, myrtle can be kind of, you know, you can probably plant within that. Violets, I wouldn't worry about violets. I would just plant amongst it. I think that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. If you can just start putting some native plants, just poking them in wherever you can is great. There are some non-native plants that are allelopathic and give off chemicals to inhibit the growth of other plants. So you might find some difficulties. I don't know if lily of the valley is like that. I'm suspect only because it seems to grow real dense areas and nothing else comes up amongst through it. So, but you know, I think you pick away at stuff. You don't have to annihilate everything, but just interject some natives wherever you can.
Wondering about how does having native plants improve the water quality?
Our native plants are really deep-rooted plants. That's really a great question. Native plants have anywhere from, I think, little blue stem, and it's well over 5 feet. The roots go down into the ground, and I usually show a profile. There's lots of nice illustrations out there about root profiles. They go down many feet into the ground, very impressive root systems, frankly. And around each of the rootlets, there's a little air space. And that little air space is where the water soaks into the ground. It has a way to get into the ground and around the rootlets. And of course, what's so important about that is because that's where all the soil organisms are, which are basically water animals. And they need that moisture to deal with the nitrogen and all the magic that happens around roots to for the plant to take up nutrients. So the roots are very important in helping aerate the soil and allow for water to soak into the ground and then to be slowly either the nutrients taken up and broken down or other pollutants sometimes get bound to the soils. So it's just a way for the water to soak slowly into the ground and get treated before it gets to groundwater.
Okay. I'm not sure I'm understanding this question. If there are insects on the butterfly bush, are they not native insects?
Now, butterfly bush, again, the non-native plant that has the big pendulous blossoms that all the pollinators go to, the monarch butterflies will go to that. The swallowtail butterflies will go to that. It's a quick and easy fast food joint. So it's not, we don't, I don't know if there's any specific non-native insects that we have that are attracted to it that recognize it from Asia. But it just doesn't provide a food source for the life cycle of our native insects.
Okay. 3 more questions. It looks like, what would your top 3 native plants be for part sun or shade with regular moisture site, just as a start?
Oh boy. You know, I'll answer and then I'll think of something later tonight and say, why didn't I say that? I mean, I would go for the milkweed. I enjoy watching the milkweed, and I think our monarch butterflies still need all the help they can get. The population that's here is the one that makes the big trek back to Mexico. So, you know, we're kind of like the last step of the whole generational evolution of the population. So milkweed will do, swamp milkweed will do fine with a little bit of shade and average soil, average moisture. So that's a good one. Gosh, there's some wonderful shrubs too, like clethra is a great pollinator plant, and that is happy and with some partial shade if you're looking for a shrub plant that has a wonderful flower and fragrance late in the summer. Gosh, I like that Bernardo Fistulosa. It does fine in full sun, but everybody likes a little, most plants are okay with a few hours of shade to just take the heat off, especially in the hot, dry summer. So I'd go with that one.
Good. What is the name of the plant for the clearwing moth?
That was Leatris. Gay feather is the common cultivar, I think, but Leatris.
Okay, and then we have, let's see, 2 more questions. We've talked a lot about meadows. Is there anything important that should be returned to the forested areas?
Return to the forested areas, like as far as diverse, well, one of my recent pet peeves has been seeing people who have neighbors with forested areas who then who brush it all out. They leave the trees, but they get rid of all the understory, which is a terrible loss because the native understory is full of black huckleberry and low bush blueberry, wintergreen, teaberry, you know, pipsissewa. And so it's just a shame to brush all that out of there because that's as important as the trees, that whole combination. I know Doug Tallamy said if you've got oaks, plant more oaks. You can't ever have enough oak trees. And certainly we've seen when we get these extreme storms like our tornado, we still see all the damage from the tornado that came through a few years ago now. Planting more trees is important. You can get little whips that are just a couple of dollars. You can buy them from Coldstream Nurseries out of, I can't remember if it's Minnesota or Wisconsin, somewhere out there. A couple of dollars a tree, and they're just little whips, but they will take and grow and kind of be there, you know, after we're gone, but they'll be there to be nursery trees, to be young trees when we lose these bigger ones. So always important to be thinking ahead and to protect the trees that are here. We seem to cut trees down willy-nilly just because they're messier in the way when many of them have been here for 30 and 40 years, longer than most of us have lived on the Cape. So I don't know. But I think it's just important to preserve what we have in our forested areas that's native.
Yeah, especially the underbrush, as you said. Last question, are ferns native plants?
Yep, there are lots of ferns that are good native plants. Some of the ferns that we have in our landscape at the office are lady fern. Don't ask me the scientific names of these. Eastern wood fern is a good one that does fine in dry shade or sun. So does the lady fern. They're not all wet moisture type ferns. And cinnamon fern, royal fern, ostrich fern. Many of these are like ostrich fern. Many of the ferns are native to other parts of the Massachusetts, but they'll do fine in a garden. And then of course here on the Cape, we have a lot of bracken fern, also dry shade. So ferns are great. You know, not a pollinator plant, but not everything has to be.
Yeah, we have ferns. BCT has ferns. You can see them at the Eddie Sisters property on the Eddie Sisters Trail because there were bogs and irrigation channels there. There was, you know, there's water there and it's very shaded.
Yeah, this is a beautiful time to get out and go to wetland areas because all the ferns are, you know, they're in frond stage and they're just very attractive.
Yeah. I had one last question. The garden at APCC, are the plants labeled there?
They have to be relabeled. Last summer was minimal tending. Not many of us were there tending to things, and it was so dry that a lot of stuff just got crispy, and we don't irrigate. So this year we're going to be rediscovering what made it and where things are, and we try to put little signs on them, but we have to redo that because I know many of those are just gone. But we do. I don't know if we're going to start, when we'll start this up again, but we do like to give tours. I'm happy to take people through just a small group. I think we'll probably wait until we're really through the COVID thing altogether, but small groups of, 6 or so people, and we can show you what the native plants are and where we have them.
That was going to be my next question. Thank you. Well, thank you, Kristin. This was great. And I think everybody really enjoyed it. So we're all ready to go out and garden.
Yes, good.
Inspired us. Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining. Have a good night.